Hi, everybody. Welcome to a new edition of Let's Talk About Education with Antonio Corrales. As you may know, I'm an educator, an entrepreneur, and a professor at the University of Houston Clear Lake. My main goal is to introduce you to pioneers in the field of education and to let you know about topics that you may not be aware of, but you may be interested in. Today, we have the honor to have with us Dr. Cheryl Sawyer, somebody who has changed the life of many in the field of counseling and is extremely knowledgeable in the topic of human trafficking. Thank you so much for being with us today, Dr. Sawyer.
Thank you for inviting me. I sincerely appreciate it. This
Absolutely.
is a topic that I'm sure most educators need to know about.
Absolutely.
It's been a long, cold, lonely winter. Little darling, it feels like years since it's been here. Here comes the sun.
Okay, Dr. Sawyer, so let's start letting the audience know a little bit about yourself, your career, and how do you get where you are right now?
Well, I started off as a junior high teacher, and I taught junior high for close to 15, almost 20 years, junior high and special ed in the lower grades. Eventually, I came to study to be a school counselor, and I was a school counselor for a little while. And then I came to the doctorate level here at the university, and for the last 17 years, I've been training people to be school counselors and licensed professional counselors.
Fantastic. Now, human trafficking is a tragedy, and sadly is more current than ever, especially among children and minors. Let's start by asking you, why are you so passionate about this topic? Why human trafficking is so important to you?
One of the reasons is that I'm so passionate about it is that it is unknown. And I look at the kids sitting in my class and I wonder what's going on with them and why are they not being successful. Well, it turns out that there's many, many insidious things that are happening in their background that most educators never would have thought about. When somebody's not being successful, we think, oh, they stayed up last night watching TV or playing video games, or they're just lazy, or maybe they had a fight with their parent. So you take it a step further, you think, maybe their problems are that their parents are getting a divorce, or that they're unhappy that a sib got something that they didn't. Well, for some of our children, far too many of our children, it's much, much deeper and horrible than we could even imagine. Years ago, 30 years ago, people didn't even acknowledge that children were being sexually abused at all at home. It was like, oh, that's a taboo topic. Over the last 30 years, the predominance of incest in the home has come to the surface, and we find out that a child is withdrawn, quiet, or acting out because they've been molested at home by usually a family member.
Wow.
And this, 1 out of every 4 girls
Wow.
has been molested by the time she's 18.
Wow.
1 out of every 6 boys has been molested by the time.
Wow. Which
she's
is
18.
a taboo because people think the boys never, get molested, or it's not that.
We-
1 out of 6 boys. Wow.
We know that statistically, 50% of the sex trafficking victims out there are boys.
Wow.
And they are being sold on the streets, sold within their families, sold to private individuals. They are being sold by, we always imagine that the predator is a stranger. We teach stranger danger all the time. 30% of sex trafficking victims are being trafficked by members of their own families. Members of their own families. So if, for instance, mom is a druggie and she is looking for ways to purchase whatever it is that she wants to buy to get stoned on, she might rent out her daughter or rent out her son. And I use the term rent because the child becomes a piece of property.
Wow.
Children have very few rights in the world.
Wow.
What child can say, I don't like the way my mom is raising me? Who's going to get the benefit of the doubt?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, these human trafficking, Dr. Sawyer, that occurs among all ages. I mean, what is the earliest that can it start?
Well,
that you're aware of?
As a counselor, the youngest one that I've ever worked with was a 3-year-old.
3-year-old, wow.
3-year-old.
Oh my God.
And her mother was a druggie. She had a 4-year-old brother. And the mother had taught the 3-year-old and the 4-year-old to do sexual acts. And the mother allowed people, she filmed it, and she allowed people to watch these videos or watch her children in person with a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old.
Oh my God.
And you think, what? Why? This is beyond my capacity as a decent human being to understand why anyone would like this.
I remember talking to you one time that you were mentioning that the Super Bowl was one event that human trafficking had high peaks at that point. As one, like, it's just for the audience to know a little example of where you can have.
Super Bowl weekend is extremely dangerous when it comes to sex trafficking. People come to the Super Bowl. They're coming to a town that's not their town. They believe that they can get away with committing a crime, and many of them do. Children are procured either by a steady stream of kids where they have tapped into these kids for years or for a long time, or snatch and grab kids off the street. And they are put in a hotel room, and the bad guy gets the key to the hotel room and has his 45 minutes of fame, and the child then services somebody else and somebody else and somebody else. Whereas other kids are procured and rented to a cluster of people for the weekend.
Oh my God. Now, why the Super Bowl is because you have and it's interesting for the audience to know that this happens here in these United States of America, but why the Super Bowl? Why is it because it's the most watched show in the country? I mean, what because of the?
It's one of the biggest, shortest major party weekends of the year, where there's a tremendous amount of money that rolls into the city. They're only staying for a few days, and they roll right back out.
Exactly. So there's less compromise for everybody.
Yes, and you consider the amount of money that comes into any major city during a major sporting event. And most folks don't consider that. But fortunately, our police, the FBI, our governor's office had a task force.
They're really proactive and trying.
Yes, we were very proactive. We had safe places set up for the children to be taken, and some people view these children as prostitutes. I view these children as victims.
Correct. So do you have like safe havens for them to you as the police together with the government organization? You have safe havens for them when they're captured to be brought and
Yes.
kind of helped when that happened during those events or those.
Yes, we had safe havens. Once they were processed, they were medically assessed and stabilized. They were given opportunities for counselors. And then they will be followed to help them because they will deal with trauma probably for the rest of their lives. But ironically, they will be back in your classrooms within 5 days.
Wow.
And they will most likely not tell you.
Now, and that's a really good point that you're bringing it up, because now I want to go back to, for the educators looking at us right now, administrators, teachers, what are the most important things that teachers, counselors, administrators should do to positively and effectively combat human trafficking at their school or their district? What are the steps that you think that they should follow to in some way, in their capacity, try to combat this problem that is present? And I think the first step, and I don't know, but it will be being aware that there is a problem, because sometimes we just live in a little bubble that we think that, like you said at the beginning, it's just they're moving or probably they just went to sleep late, when they may that issue of human trafficking is there as a main protagonist of the whole equation.
Awareness that there is a problem at all, whether it be human trafficking or we're pretty good about knowing when there's chemical dependency or chemical abuse. We are beginning to become more aware when there is child abuse and incest in the homes. Being aware that this problem exists, being aware of the fact that 30% does happen within the family. There is also a strong link between teenagers serving as the liaisons, where they procure their friends, and for payment, their friends perform sexual acts, and the in-between teenager gets a cut. It's the middleman. So as an educator, I remember I went to workshop after workshop. This is how you teach English. This is how you teach science. These are the core objectives for social studies.
Correct.
And I eventually learned it was just as important for me to be aware of these are the signs of sex abuse. These are the signs of having a bad home life. And I learned to ask the right questions. And rather than make the wrong accusations, like, you're so lazy, you didn't do your homework last night, this is the third time this month you have forgotten your homework. Okay, it's easy for me to say that as a teacher. What is not easy for me to realize is, where was this kid last night? Maybe he was working not as a grocery clerk. Maybe he was working on the streets or in his mother's back porch or at the pimp's house or at a hotel. And can he tell you that?
Yeah, because that's a big deal. And I think what you're trying to touch is in the relationship between the teacher and the students, right?
Nothing is more crucial to learning than the creation of a relationship. If that child is going to learn, they must trust that you can help them, whether it's learning math problems or whether it's sharing the horrors at home. If there is no relationship between my student and me, no learning is going to occur. And so I must first develop that relationship. Majority of the years that I worked with junior high, I worked with special ed, I worked with gifted. I would spend the first few weeks obviously doing curriculum, but the most important thing that I had to do during those first few weeks was create the relationship with those kids so that eventually they might trust me.
Correct.
Once they trust me, then they'll know that when I say problems 1, 3, and 5 are wrong, we've got to work on this. They'll trust me, and they won't say, oh, I'm stupid.
Correct.
They'll go, she'll help me work on this. And it might be, it's problems 1, 3, and 5 are not math problems. 1, 3, and 5 is, I have no shoes to wear. I had to sleep on the floor because my mother had to entertain a house full of people last night. Or I was out working the streets last night.
Correct. So what you're saying, establishing relations, one of the things that people sometimes dismiss that fact because it requires time. And right now with all the pacing and requirements for teachers, teachers may think that this is not important, but what you're hearing is this is there's a direct connection between relationship and academic performance. If they invest time establishing relationships, the students are going to tend to perform better for the teachers. Now, what can the principals and counselors do to encourage that in a campus? What recommendations can you give them for those principals looking at us right now, superintendents, counselors? What can they do to promote relations between teachers and students and at the same time combat human trafficking in their organizations?
Well, I would say that, first off, in order to create relationships with students, you can work relationship development into a curriculum, any curriculum.
Correct.
Whether it's reading and you read about the development of relationships, or you read about somebody else's story, or it's writing and tell me about X, Y, and Z, and the teacher also shares bits about them. My students knew I had 2 dogs. I had pictures of my dogs on the wall.
Correct.
So that was a link between me and the kid. They told me about their dogs. I talked about my dogs. I would talk about a time where I fell off a bicycle and broke my arm. They would tell me about a time that they fell off a roof and broke their arm.
All right.
So we found commonalities, just as you would with any social party. But we can work them into curriculum.
Okay.
It can be worked into curriculum.
Yeah.
There is not one single subject that should be so detached from life that you cannot help the kid see how this incident is affecting this life.
And I know you do an awesome project with you train administrators and teachers to do an awesome project with art and writing for the students to express themselves and their stories, and they create little books.
Yes. We have a project where I've given teachers curricular ideas on how to infuse this into math, science, all the subjects, and they give the kid a subject, a topic or a question, and the children or the teens write stories out of their lives, chapters out of their lives. And it doesn't have to be sequential. And they take all these chapters and they put them into PowerPoint slides. And then the PowerPoint slides can either be an electronic storybook for them, or it can be
Yeah, so those projects, those books that you create with the students, so that they're able to write on them. So they had to practice writing, they had to practice reading, they had to practice also art. Can you show the audience a little bit? Tell us a little bit how they are.
Well, this is one of the books.
Okay.
And they don't cost very much to make, and they're hard copy.
Okay.
So it is quite impressive. And they include reading and writing,
Okay.
but it can also include science. It can also include math.
Okay.
So cause and effect, sequencing.
Okay.
So when you're saying the journey between A and B, we went on vacation and it took us 9 hours and we crossed 3 states. So the kid is able to help calculate the math, the time. We were going X number of miles per hour. They can convert time. They went online on the web and they found pictures, or they brought pictures from home.
So they created their own story.
They created their own
So
storybook.
that book is just one child, right?
This is one child.
Wow. Okay.
I've changed the names to protect them, but this is Federico's book. And actually, Federico was an unaccompanied minor who traveled to us from Northern Triangle of Central America.
Wow.
He went
And
through
he called this story My Journey?
My Journey. That was what he called it.
Wow.
He did this in Spanish.
Wow.
We translated it in English for the purposes of showing it to
Well, it's
folks.
a way also for ESL and bilingual to practice both languages.
Right.
That's a great thing.
So they can code switch, and they can write it actually in 2 languages. They can infuse Spanish and English whenever they want to. The teacher can go back and coach them that is an outstanding story. Emotionally, you told it in Spanish because that's where your emotions lie. Now let's work on creating this story in English. Well, this boy was horribly abused along the way. He rode the tops of freight trains to get here. He was beaten, attacked, molested. He was not able to tell us all the details in order. We had to use maps, so we introduced geography. He showed us, he found pictures on the web that were comparable to places where he had been along the way. Then he went back and he estimated time for us. That's pretty complex in 2 languages.
Wow, all these things that he had to put together.
Yes. He had to discuss weather because he went through deserts and mountains.
That is fantastic.
So we were talking landforms.
So there are ways for people to not only help establishing relations, but also allowing the students to tell their story within the curriculums. They don't have to, in other words, they don't have to reinvent the wheel. They don't have to create a special block for it. It could be embedded in the curriculum.
This is embedded. This is embedded into the daily curriculum.
That is fantastic.
And as you can see, he told us about rape.
Exactly.
And as you can see, eventually, now that wasn't the first one, but as you can see, he told us about his hopes and dreams for the future.
That is fantastic. Now, for folks out there who are watching us right now, teachers, what agencies do you think that collaborate the best with them? Let's say that a teacher suspect or is informed by a student. Finally is able to figure out this student is either abused or being trafficked or whatever. What can they do, legally and institutionally to address that issue? What do you recommend?
Call the police.
Okay.
Absolutely, call the police. Do not go out digging for evidence.
Correct.
That is not our place.
Correct.
The police do the investigations.
What about Child Protective Services?
Child Protective Services will come involved. They will get involved if the police believe that the child is in a setting at home where they are not physically safe.
Correct.
If the child is in a safe setting at home, the police will contact Child Protective Services.
Okay.
But the police handle the criminal angle.
Correct.
Child Protective Services only makes sure that the child is living in a safe place.
Correct.
So absolutely, you let those police initiate. We do not want to contaminate any evidence. We don't want defense attorneys to have any recourse saying you put this story into their head.
Correct.
So go directly
Let the authorities
to the
handle
police.
it. Yeah.
And fortunately, nearly every police station has child liaisons and child divisions, and
Okay.
they know how to handle children.
How to handle that.
And we are continuing to educate police on to how to work with children who have been traumatized, to break down the barriers, and we're teaching them the first thing you have to do as an officer is to create a relationship with this kid.
Correct. That's fantastic. Now, Dr. Sawyer, moving to another topic that is kind of connected. What about the role of counselors in schools? And I know we may have need a whole show for that one, but talk a little bit about your perspective about the role that school counselors may have in schools, because this is kind of a hot topic, because a lot of counselors are, when you look at, we have a big debate in the country about mental health. We have we always trying to, you hear all the time that it's necessary to provide better services to people in general about mental health. But then when we look at our schools, sadly for us, number one, counselors tend not to be mandated in many states. Second, counselors ended up doing administrative jobs such as assistant principals and principals instead of doing the counseling job. What is your perspective about that role, and how can that improve in the schools and your experience in all these years in education?
School counselors are specifically trained to handle to deal with the emotional mental health needs of their school. A school counselor typically has a 48 to 60 hour master's degree program. An administrator's program is usually far shorter, 30 to 36. So why does a school counselor have to go to 48 hours of programming? Because we spend an enormous amount of time teaching them how to help the mental health needs. We require them to be a teacher first, and then we require them to do 48 to 60 hours more to what are the mental health needs. So they have an extraordinary skill set, which is being wasted.
Correct.
And those who are wasting it are confining their school counselors to picking up assistant principal responsibilities.
Correct.
They haven't been trained to be an assistant principal.
Correct.
That is a skill set in its own. They are not trained to count tax booklets or star textbooks or
Correct.
assessments. Actually, someone else can do that.
Correct.
They are trained that if your child comes to me and she has been brutalized somehow, I can help her contend with this. This week's news alone, there is a school near us where a mother shot and killed her 2 children and her husband. So now we have a school, an elementary school, in massive grief. And astounding, how could anybody's mother shoot and kill her kids? So all the children at this school are going, we've lost our friend. And oh my gosh, their mama shot and killed him? How could this be? All right, this is not a social studies topic. This is not a math topic. But there's not going to be any math today if this child is focused in on, what if my mama goes off the brink? Or, I can't think that was my best friend that died. Who in the school has the ability to help this child move past that?
Well, and I think when you go back, you're hitting a really good point. And I think for administrators and teachers and educators in general, superintendents, understanding that there's a direct connection between emotional intelligence, emotional balancing, and academic performance. The students won't be able to perform if they don't receive those services, those counseling services. And I think that's what the biggest fight or the biggest battle is, that elevating the level of understanding that counselors need to do counseling. And not
Counselors need to do counseling.
Yeah.
And they need to do crisis intervention. They need to do consultation to help teachers understand that everything doesn't have to be shoved to the counselor.
Yeah.
They need to help teachers develop the relationships so that the teachers can be supportive in the classrooms. Yeah. And when this falls into place, so will academics and so will discipline. By shoving the mental health issues to the bottom of the priority pile, the school is effectively sabotaging their own ability to be productive.
All right. Now, to finalize, Dr. Sawyer, what recommendation do you have, for parents, students, and educators in general that are out there that would like to, somehow combat human trafficking and being more savvy in regards to this topic so they can improve their schools? What recommendations?
Be aware of the symptoms, be aware of the characteristics, be very, very aware. Be watchful. Be as knowledgeable about sex trafficking and child abuse as you are about drunk driving and use of narcotics in the schools. If you are as aware, we will be able to pre-act. We will be able to intervene rather than try to patch things up after it's over.
All right. I want to thank you one more time for being with us today, Dr. Sawyer. I want to thank our audience, and please stay tuned in our channel. We're going to continue having interviews like these, trying to elevate the level of awareness in regards to this topic and many others. Remember to visit our webpage, sterlingevaluationandassessment.com. Have a nice day and stay tuned.